By the late 1990s, more than 80% of all American brides received a diamond engagement ring, and yet only 60 years earlier, almost nobody anywhere in America proposed with one. That change was not romance but a marketing campaign, perhaps the greatest ever run, and the playbook behind it is still running on you every single day today. 1930s America is deep in the Great Depression. Luxury spending has collapsed completely, and diamond sales have fallen along with everything else. Engagement rings exist but follow no standard at all, and couples of the era propose with colored stones, with pearls, or very often with no ring whatsoever. A diamond in this era is simply a rock, a pretty rock, and certainly a very expensive rock, but in these years absolutely nobody on earth connects it with love or marriage. Meanwhile, one single company controls almost the entire world's supply of these unwanted stones, a mining giant called De Beers, founded all the way back in 1888. De Beers grew powerful by carefully managing exactly how many diamonds ever reached the open market, and by quietly influencing diamond prices in every corner of the world. Think carefully about that position, because a monopoly on a product with collapsing demand is really just a very large and very expensive warehouse full of worthless rock. Control over supply is worthless when nobody actually wants the product, and genuine consumer demand was exactly the one thing De Beers did not have in these years. So the company hired N.W. Ayer and Son of Philadelphia, which was one of the oldest and most respected advertising agencies operating anywhere in the United States. The brief they were handed was very close to impossible. Convince many millions of ordinary working people to spend a small fortune on something they never even knew they needed. The agency's answer would quietly change weddings around the whole world forever, because the team made one truly radical decision. They were simply not going to sell diamonds at all. Instead, they would sell an idea, the idea that love itself could be measured in stone, and the campaign began quietly in the year 1938. N.W. Ayer planted romantic stories in newspapers and magazines across America, tales of dramatic proposals, of glamorous celebrities, and of the sparkling diamonds that sealed every promise. Readers believed they were reading genuine news, but they were actually reading advertising with the labels stripped away, decades before anyone had even coined the phrase content marketing. There were no product shots and no price lists anywhere at all, just story after story about romance, repeated until the whole idea felt like it had always simply existed. Slowly, the American middle class absorbed the intended message, that this is simply what sophisticated and successful people naturally do whenever they fall in love and marry. Then, in 1947, a copywriter named Francis Geraghty stayed late at the agency one single night, working alone to finish the campaign's remaining paperwork before the next morning came. At the very end of that one long night, she scribbled 4 small words at the bottom of the page, and those 4 words were simply this: a diamond is forever. 4 words that tied an indestructible stone to an indestructible promise, and suddenly this was not jewelry anymore but permanence itself, love that could never physically break. The line said nothing at all about price and nothing about quality. It made only one quiet claim, that this feeling, captured in this one stone, could never possibly end. Since 1948, those same 4 words have appeared in every single De Beers engagement advertisement ever printed, every one of them, for nearly 80 unbroken years. The slogan gave the brand new ritual its emotional meaning, but every single ritual also needs practical rules, and so De Beers quietly sat down and wrote those rules too. Rule number 1 concerned the price. Exactly how much should a man spend on a ring? Because before De Beers, no such etiquette existed anywhere in American life. So the company simply invented one from thin air. 2 full months of your salary, a number with no logic behind it except that it moved a lot of expensive inventory. The genius of it lies in the framing, because the question is suddenly no longer whether you should buy a diamond at all, but only exactly how big it should be. Notice what that clever rule really does. It ties the price of love directly to your income so that no suitor anywhere can ever safely spend too little on it. Rule number 2 was education. De Beers created the famous 4 C's: cut, clarity, color, and carat, a complete grading system for judging every single diamond sold. Suddenly, ordinary buyers felt like genuine diamond experts, but every single letter of that borrowed expertise had been written by the very same company that was selling them the stone. Rule number 3 was borrowed glamour, as De Beers placed its diamonds on the most photographed women alive at the time, stars like Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe. In 1953, Monroe sang that diamonds are a girl's best friend, and from that moment onward, the message traveled everywhere in the entire world that Hollywood movies could possibly reach. The stars were never presenters reading out scripted lines. The diamonds simply appeared wherever glamour lived, and audiences everywhere quietly drew the intended conclusion entirely by themselves. And whenever charm alone was not quite enough, the advertisements reached straight for guilt, because one real printed headline read, "She married you for better or for worse. Let her know how it is going." That was the punchline of the advertisement. Your entire marriage graded publicly, measured out in front of the neighbors in carats. Actual price, expertise, glamour, and guilt, 5 moves working together, and the campaign worked far beyond imagination, because the sales numbers prove it beyond any argument. In 1939, De Beers sold $23 million worth of diamonds in America, a respectable figure, but nothing compared with what was quietly coming next. By 1979, that same American number had reached $2.1 billion a year, which is almost 100 times more in only 40 years. That is exactly what category creation looks like when you draw it out on a chart. Not stealing market share from your rivals, but manufacturing an entire new market from nothing. Then the playbook went fully and truly global, and in every new country it entered, the very same campaign was carefully rewritten to fit the local culture it found there. In Japan, diamonds came to mean harmony and family legacy. In Germany, they meant craftsmanship. In Brazil, status. And in India, the Bollywood film industry carried the message. The stories looked completely different on the surface in every country, but underneath ran the very same 5 moves, running quietly in every single market on Earth. But the deepest trick of them all was the one that nobody ever saw. Because the simple truth is that diamonds were never actually rare in any meaningful way at all. De Beers controlled the whole world's supply and released just enough stones each year to meet demand. Never enough to flood the market and never ever enough to crash prices. The advertising sold the idea of rarity while the company vault quietly made it true, because scarcity was never discovered here. Scarcity was carefully and deliberately manufactured. Value, it turns out, does not actually need to be real in order to be durable. It only ever needs to be believed, and then policed without mercy. For half a century, the beautiful illusion held almost perfectly in place, and then, slowly at first, the whole carefully constructed story began to visibly crack apart. In the late 1990s, investigative reports linked diamonds to brutal armed conflicts in Africa, and suddenly the romance at the heart of the story had a body count. The campaign had always depended on one single powerful image, purity, meaning love, permanence, and innocence, and the brutal reality of war simply does not fit anywhere in that picture. De Beers co-founded the Kimberley process in 2003 to certify legitimate stones, and it then launched its Forevermark brand in 2008 to reassure its anxious buyer. Then came a far bigger threat, laboratories growing flawless diamonds, and in 2018 De Beers surprised everyone by launching Lightbox, its very own lab-grown diamond brand. By May of 2025, falling lab diamond prices had forced Lightbox to close its doors for good, because forever, as it turns out now, apparently has an expiry date. When a laboratory can grow your product on demand, scarcity simply dies, and manufactured scarcity was the one single load-bearing wall holding up the whole beautiful 80-year story. But the playbook itself never actually died at all. Invent the ritual, set the price rule, educate the buyer, seed the culture, and always carefully manufacture your own scarcity. Limited sneaker drops, luxury waiting lists, subscription tiers named Gold and Platinum, the very same 5 moves are still running everywhere today, and they are running directly on you. Once you finally see the pattern, you can never unsee it again. So for every invented tradition, every price rule, every official grading system, ask who wrote it. In 1999, the trade magazine Advertising Age named "A diamond is forever" the single greatest advertising slogan of the entire 20th century, beating every famous rival. Not because it sold the most product, but because it proved forever that marketing can invent a completely new tradition and then convince the whole world it had always existed. 4 small words, scribbled late one night by a single tired copywriter, are still selling exactly the same promise to brand new couples almost 80 years later today. And that is the real lesson for anyone learning marketing today. The strongest campaigns never simply join the conversation, they quietly build the entire world the conversation happens inside. Next time on this channel, the story of how one company sold completely plain water for $1.4 billion by marketing it exactly like death metal.